Thislan Verse, and today I'm going to be doing a wrap up of what I read for the African Fantasy and Science Fiction Readathon. This was hosted in July of last year by Soila Kenya, and the goal of this readathon was to read as many books set either in Africa or an African inspired world as possible during the month of July. I found out about it relatively later in the readathon, so I didn't really read a whole lot of books for it. But I just wanted to shout out Soila Kenya because I enjoy her channel and just touch on what I read that month. So, of the stories that I read, there's only one full-length novel, and that was Daughters of Enri by Reni K. Amayo. This is a story of twins who are separated at birth, who have abilities that have something to do with their world's earth goddess. It's about them forging their own paths and the story of how they eventually unite and what effect that has on the kingdom that they live in. I've seen it get a decent amount of hype on BookTube given the size of the publisher. Like, it has a gorgeous cover. I think a lot of people mention that when they mention this book. And I think the reviews are kind of middling to favorable. And for me, the story was just okay. It's kind of confusing me in some ways because on the one hand, I am always like, I don't want to read a story that I feel like I read before. I want to see something new. And this was definitely like not something I'd seen before, but also the ways in which it was unpredictable and new, I don't know if it was really for the better. I thought that the twins were going to meet up a lot sooner than they did. Like, they're apart for almost the entire book. They don't really meet up until like the 3/4 mark, like maybe the 80% mark. Like, it's pretty near to the end. And I felt like the pacing was kind of all over the place in terms of like how the plot was moving. Like, it didn't feel like we were just kind of steadily chugging along. It felt like there was like peaks and valleys, and that also I think slowed it down for me. In terms of the characters, I don't know if either of the twins really stood out to me. There is a medicine woman who lives in like the palace, who's very influential. Like, she's the main character that I remember from this story. The lore was interesting. There are like these strange birds who deliver messages throughout the kingdom. There's like bioluminescent moss. There's a magical lion who mauls certain people and is controlled by very particular spells. There are statues of Mamiwata spirits that have this hypnotic effect on passersby. And the world sounded beautiful and all the lore sounded very cool, but it didn't feel cohesive. It all felt so tangential to the lives of the twins, and I wanted it to be more integrated. So on the whole, this was like a very okay read for me. Like, there are elements that I liked, but I don't think I'll be continuing the series for this, just because I don't know if the elements that I liked are really going to get a payoff in the next book. So Daughters of Enri, I think the African influences are pretty straightforward. The different ethnic groups in the novel each seem to have a different like real world counterpart in terms of like the dress and the names. So then everything else that I read for this readathon were short stories. There's Dune Song by Suyi Davies Okungbowa. This appeared in Apex magazine. It's about this desert-based world, and there are people who live in the desert and they're told not to venture too far beyond the bounds of their village. And it's about a young girl. Her mother has ventured beyond the village and disappeared, and she wants to find out what happened to her. And this story is really about a big leap of faith. For me, this was a story that felt quieter. The writing was good. The world is interesting and memorable. I haven't read a whole lot of stories based in like desert worlds, so that was interesting. Beyond the bounds of the village, there are these dust storms raging, and the storms sound like the voices of the gods. And I really like that idea of like the sound and the desert, and like this idea of like butting up against the edge of a world, a barrier that no one has ever crossed. Dune Song, I don't know if there's anything that was directly linking it to a place in Africa. For me, it was just kind of like knowing Okungbowa as an author and the types of things that he writes about. I took a guess at it was inspired by somewhere in Africa. And then the next two short stories are from A Phoenix First Must Burn, the short story anthology edited by Patrice Caldwell. This is an anthology with young adult stories about Black teen girls in various fantastical settings. So I read the anthology, I think, in July and August, and I only read like maybe half of this anthology during the month of July. So the stories that I counted are from like I think the first half of the book. So there's The Rules of the Land by Leadon Johnson. This is about a girl who is a descendant of Yamaya, and her father and her mother have a very strained relationship. It's very hot and cold, and she doesn't quite know what to make of it. It's about a war that's raging on around them and a young girl's plea to a goddess. My recollections of the story are really foggy because it's been a while since I read it. Since one of the patron deities in this world is Yamaya, I thought that was a pretty straightforward West African influence. I don't know if this story had a certain folkloric base. Just based on how things play out, it really reminded me of Selkie stories, which are from, I think it's Scotland or Ireland. And I don't know if this was just like a West African inspired reimagining of a Selkie story, or if it's just like one of those coincidences that there's a story from somewhere in West Africa that's like very similar to a Selkie story and this is based off of that. Or maybe it's just like all coincidence and I'm just projecting and this is actually has nothing to do with Selkies. I don't know. I think the things that stood out to me about this story are how complicated romantic relationships are, especially once you have children. I think this is also a story about sacrifice and tapping into power for some higher good. And then last up is The Goddess Provides by L.L. McKinney. This is also from the anthology Phoenix First Must Burn. I touched on this in my July and August wrap up, so I'm going to try to not rehash too much of what I said there. I guess this was African inspired based on the characters' names and some of the clothing. So like I wouldn't be surprised also if McKinney hadn't intended it to be that way and I just misread it. And this was a story that I really enjoyed. And I think that's partially because there's like a twist in here and I love short stories with like a twist and a good reveal. It's about a teenager who's heir to the throne. Basically, all the rulers swear their loyalty to a certain religion, and her mother was very devout, but she's never been a believer herself, and that causes a lot of internal strife in terms of can she even take the throne, and then all of her family is killed, and that sets her down a path of revenge. The topics that like stood out for me the most in the story are family loyalty and the questions about religion in terms of, I guess, what is the best way to serve a religion. There's a character in the story who's very religious and who also does things that contradict the religion's principles in the name of the religion. Like, he believes that by doing this, he's furthering the ultimate goal of the religion. And then there's a character who doesn't believe at all, but the way that she lives her life and her life's purpose and what gives her strength is very much derived from the religion that she's not connected to. And that just gave me something to think about, just as a philosophical question and also like a cultural question, like, and the ways that even when you don't believe in a religion anymore, how it just kind of creeps up in your life just because of how you're raised and like what you're used to. So that was my video. Thanks for watching. If you like it, please hit the like button. If you've read any of the stories I've mentioned and you want to talk about them, please comment below. If you haven't already, please subscribe. It's a good way to stay up to date with me and my bookish activities. I'm going to have my schedule for the month in the About section of my channel. Thank you for watching, everyone. Have a good one. Goodbye.